Coog's house. The Houston Cougars go back to back after an ugly win. We can breathe.
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs Day podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and we are the Big 12 champs here with the Houston Cougars after knocking off Cincinnati by just 9 points. It finished up, was that 73-64. Ugly win. Throw your reactions to the show in the comments down below. To say live reaction show post game, brought to you by our sponsor over at Fabric. More on them later, but man, oh man, Houston decided to make it difficult for them on this Saturday. I will stress, first of all, today's going to be a quick, short post-game wrap-up. Just kind of breathe and then go enjoy it. Have a fun Saturday night being Big 12 champs. We'll be back with you Monday morning. But ugly one at the start, starting off down 10-2 to Cincinnati, and then finishing on kind of a bit of a Cincinnati run to cut it from 25 and stuff like that down to just 9. Doesn't matter how pretty it is because they got the job done. I want to talk about some of the things that stuck out to me at that finish in a second. I want to talk some about really, I guess I'm going to give a little credit to Cincinnati somewhere in there as well. But the main thing, as Adrian points out here, longtime listener Adrian points out, that we are back-to-back Big 12 champions. Now, big part of this one, it's easy to say, is LJ Cryer's 20 points. He's not on a lot of people's radar for Big 12 Player of the Year, National Player of the Year kind of stuff. If Houston wins this conference by multiple games and you've got guys like that getting 20 and only one other player on the team even breaks double digits and some of these key victories across the board, it's pretty hard to imagine that it's just happening without a Big 12 Player of the Year kind of guy on the roster. Cryer, 4-4 from the stripe, just 2 of 6 from 3, which is actually low for him, both in attempts and in makes. But he really got the job done in the mid-range, attacking downhill. They clearly wanted to run him off the line, and it didn't seem to matter. And I'm going to say there was no other offensive production, right? Emanuel Sharp found ways to get it done when his 3 wasn't falling. Milos Uzan couldn't get anything from behind the arc, but he also had a couple nice floaters. One went in and out, too, which would have counted him over that 10-point mark. LJ Cryer doing a great job of keeping the offense going, though, and it's really just hard to imagine where this team would be without that guy. Terrance Arceneaux's 10 points off the bench were really important. I thought his shots were really, really impressively tough. He made really, really tough, impressive like fadeaways in the mid-range and stuff like that. 5-8 from the field on, again, a tough set of shot selection. Ashton points out here that the CBS telecast is not showing the cutting down of the nets. Pretty big oversight there by CBS. College basketball televised college basketball this year has been kind of awkward in how like the TV slots are all 2 hours, but the games definitely take more than that. And it's kind of been awkward timing as far as getting games started on time and not on time, whether it's ESPN, ABC, CBS. Hopefully Turner figured things out better for the tournament itself. But yeah, I think Houston win this game in a game where they had such a struggle from behind the arc, which is such a big part of their game, right? They were 3 of 14 from out there. So not only did they not make very many, they didn't get the normal, 18 to 20 of them up either. Houston shot the ball pretty well as a whole. All field goals, I guess, combined, they were 53%, 30 of 56. I guess that means there were, 27 of 42 from inside the arc. Pretty impressive day from that front. But for a team that relies on that 3-point jump shot to find ways to get to 73 points more or less without it is really, really impressive, especially when you factor in like they actually get beat on the glass in this game 32-28. And a lot of that happens kind of in that stretch at the end of the game where Cincinnati was kind of going all out to try and finish with a win because they had to have this game to have a chance to kind of finish strong here before the Big 12 tournament. but Houston only gets 6 offensive rebounds credited to them. They had a bunch of tips and deflections and stuff like that, but didn't come up with the ball a whole lot. And what's interesting there is the thing that I think Houston does so well. But again, they find ways to win even in this one when they don't. In lieu of having a bunch of points from behind the arc, Houston managed to get 40 points in the paint to dominate a team that frankly was bigger than them at nearly every position. And I think that's kind of the way that we look at this team, that, this back-to-back Big 12 champion Houston Cougar program is like, they just keep finding a way. And I know it's the American end to the Big 12, but it's really 4 conference championships in a row for Kelvin Sampson and the Cougars. And about as different of 4 teams as you could have, right? And listen, we've got a long time. They're cutting down nets on the first day in March. We're hoping to cut down nets in the early parts of April as well. Hopefully we can get through all that and see the Cougs cross the finish line finally. But we'll talk after all that about what Kelvin Sampson's legacy here is. But oh my goodness, this 4th consecutive conference championship, 2 different conferences, all kinds of different chaos. And 4 years ago with all the injuries, then you had the Jarris Walker Marcus Sasser year. Then you had Jamal Shedd last year. This year's team is a little bit different. They're always finding the next man up on a lot of these games. It's kind of been Cryer more often than not, but there were some games where it was Roberts, Milos last week on Monday. I mean, it's just kind of this who we need. That's who it is, right? And the constant evolution and evolving of this team, I think, is, when we look back on this in a long, long time, going to be a thing that we have to make sure remembering. Now, I will say, and talking about Houston, this one was particularly ugly. And I want to talk, the beginning, it was ugly. I think just kind of Houston's always taken away to, taking a few minutes to kind of feel out their opponent. They rarely ever start off, 12-2 in the first 4 minutes or anything like that. They sometimes will start off 12-2, but it's usually not in the first 4 minutes, right? And Cincinnati came out guns a-blazing, right? Early, ready to start. The TV caught up to the game in about 16-minute mark. You can go back and watch the whole thing online places. I think what's interesting in the latter part of this game is actually the ugly finish to this one. And it was interesting because I think Houston rolled out with their starters, hoping for the veteran minutes and stuff like that, and really struggled with the Cincinnati press and full court pressure and press break. And I think what you see at Cincinnati is a group of guys really very, very athletic across that front line, with guys like Dillon Mitchell and Aziz Bandaogo and that athleticism with length, I think, meant that they could kind of full court press a bunch of different guys. Simas Lukosius was kind of subbing in and out with some offense, defense, and kind of stuff, because they got all their athletes on the court best they could, Dan Skillings and guys like that. And the athleticism and length in a full court situation really got to Houston that. And I think a couple things make me not long-term worried about that. I'm sure people will be dissecting, well, that's the weak point, that's the whatever. Cincinnati, in both talking to Eric Lilly, who we had on the other day as a guest host, texted back forth one or two other Cincinnati guys that follow them more closely, and then also watch a couple of games getting ready for this myself. They're not a typical full court pressure team, and so I don't think Houston was necessarily preparing for that coming into the game. They went into it there at the end and kind of found some gold with it in a lot of ways, and so I don't know that Houston was actually getting into this one, getting ready for it. The second thing I would point out that Houston did still hold off long enough to win. When they got into half court, they had long possessions, and for what it's worth, had they been knocking down the threes at a bit more consistent rate, or consistent with what they've done this season, that game wouldn't have ever even been that close for that, right? And then I guess the third and final thing I'll say is that Cincinnati isn't a poorly coached team. They're actually a fairly well-coached team. Houston is a well-coached team too, and we'll find ways to pick and prod at this in the coming days and weeks, frankly, right? So they have Kansas Monday, Baylor next weekend, and they're into the Big 12 tournament. That's plenty of time to work on these kinds of things. Baylor's really athletic. Kansas has some run. We'll see what they go. But Houston is back-to-back Big 12 champs here, as GB Coog points out as well. And you got to love the way that sounds. Back-to-back Big 12 champs. They're selling t-shirts at the bookstore. It looks like online and stuff like that. You can go check that out. I might have pushed go on one of those myself, if I'm being really honest. It's kind of sweet. The back-to-back logo is pretty cool this year. Pretty cool. Now, I want to get into more about this one and kind of wrapping this up in a shortened live reaction show for Locked On Coogs here in 1 second. But before we get too far, I do want to remind you today's show is brought to you by Fabric, because life moves fast, especially when you have a family your family might be in town like mine is right now. And one day when you're watching your kids take their first steps, before you know it, and they're off to college, that's a really sad thing to read when you have kids that are only 20 months old like myself. That's why securing the future is so important. Fabric by Group of Life makes it easy to get term life insurance that fits your family needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You'll be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Park Ranger, the Locked On Coogs here, representing the back-to-back Big 12 champion Houston Cougars. Man, oh man, what a time to be alive. I'm telling you right now, if you told me in like 2012, 13 that Houston won the Big 12 in back-to-back years, man, oh man, I mean, being in the Big 12 in the first place would have been crazy. And like, even I'm pretty optimistic about the basketball program. Even like when they moved to the Big 12 beforehand, I don't know that I necessarily saw Houston as like a team that come in and run through the conference quite like this. I thought it'd take a year or two. We knew we had the Big 2025 recruits coming in, and that was kind of be like the year that like the group that could get things started. And they got it started well before all of that. Jamal Shed took the big step he did last year. This team has glued so well this year. And it all is just coming together. And, you know, I know we make fun of Tech sometimes with the idea of toughest people win and all that, but that's really what it feels like. Tech's Football Channel, thank you, and says, congrats. Great team, great program, great coach. Houston could replicate this success in football if fans of 10 games butts in seats. That's future problems. People asking about where we can see the celebrations. I don't know, because I was watching the CBS telecast just like you. I will say, I think I saw a couple of the players go live on Instagram when my phone went off a second ago. So you can probably check it out on their Instagram lives. And then I'm sure someone's got a link somewhere. If you do, throw it in the chat for Pequod. If I'm not pronouncing it right, I'm sorry, Pequod. But the Houston Cougars back-to-back Big 12 champs, and like, I guess when they win it by multiple games in 10 days or so, we'll probably have more context as to how crazy that is. It's the first program to go into a conference and win the conference in back-to-back years, their first 2 years in the conference in over 100 years. You know, back in the 1920s and 22 and 23 in Idaho did it. I'm not going to get into every single difference between basketball then and now, but back then they wore belts on their shorts. So like, that's telling you a lot about how far back things were back in the day. Houston wins this one 73-64, and it was ugly. The press break did seem to affect Houston, or breaking the press seemed to be problems for Houston, I should say, to make this one a little bit ugly late. Honestly, I thought Houston was kind of rushing themselves and just kind of looking to chuck the ball over the top a couple too many times. And looking, you know, sometimes it means you get the ball in the corner, and that's never a good spot. I have a lot of reason to think that they'll fix that, but I guess if they don't, we'll have more to talk about with that one. I mentioned that Crier's big game. I should point out that there was a stretch in the first half where Jojo Tugler was kind of the only thing keeping this team afloat. We should also give credit to Jojo Tugler for playing 19 minutes and getting just one personal foul. That's not something we see at him, especially with Roberts being in foul trouble in the first half. He got 2 fouls really early, and Houston kind of had to go small. And I always do a rewatch on basketball games, so I'll rewatch Sunday afternoon before I record Monday morning. And I feel like the thing I want to pull away, I want to look at more in the second watch, is how much more effective small ball was for Houston in this one. They ran horn sets in the small ball lineup. What that means is you got like horns down, you got 2 guys in the corners, two post players up top at like the top of the key, and then your point guard. And one of their two post players at the top of the key that set those horn screens was Emanuel Sharp and Terrance Arceneaux that kind of alternated the small ball four there. And I thought they were really effective the few possessions they played Emanuel Sharp there, because when he pops out, like a stretch four would pop out, he pulls Emanuel Sharp level gravity with him, pulling defenders out, really opened up a lot of space for Houston and kind of got them going in for those points in the paint in the first half. And that's something I want to watch for more in the second watch, because I think that's a really important thing that they could kind of continue to add layers to things other teams have to do for this program. Now, as far as other college basketball stuff around the country goes, Alabama and Tennessee seem to be both playing for 2 seeds to me. I don't know how you could not give Houston a 1 seed after what's been going on, but it sounds like Tennessee wins on a crazy one there. Maybe I have that backwards. Chad, I'm sure, will tell me and correct me if I'm wrong, but 3-point game, great shot at the end. Big deal for those guys. I also feel like across the board, you're going to look at like the Auburn big one over Kentucky, and everyone continues to cite Auburn as like one of their biggest wins. Is Houston, I would point out in that game, like, remember, whenever you see Auburn beating off these other teams and beating them off with a stick and all that, Houston played them to a 5-point game. It was at the Toyota Center, which was a fairly equally sold crowd. And Milos found out pretty early in the second half, and it was the first week of the season. Both teams have gotten a lot better. I don't mean to say that Auburn hasn't, but every time you see someone give Auburn credit, I like to remind myself, Houston should have, and probably in other, like, play that game out 10 times, probably could have had them. And so I look across the board here and see a bunch of programs where Houston's pretty competitive and pretty well sized up right now for a big run come March and into April. We got Kansas Monday night. Can't look past Kansas. They're coming to Houston. You did beat them there in a heartbreaker. They've been looking for revenge. I've been texting back and forth with Derek to see if we can get a crossover by then. Think about a little bit of a Maniacs March where we have a lot more content coming out. So stay tuned. Hit subscribe to YouTube so you know when those things are dropping. Try and get to you as much as we can for an exciting March Madness for the back-to-back Big 12 champion Houston Cougars. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Locked On Coogs live post-game reaction. A little short, sweet, to the point today, but I want to go celebrate, and I encourage you to do the same, because these things don't just happen. Soak it in when they do. Again, Houston Cougars back-to-back Big 12 champs officially after beating Cincinnati 73-64. I'm host Park Rangers of Locked On Coogs. Locked On Coogs is a primary of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every single day. Go Cougs.